you have a concept of truth, a philosophical notion of truth that is divorced from natural language use, then it has no applicability in ordinary life. And then I have no need of that philosophy. That really is the sort of the mental masturbation that people sort of worry about philosophers getting down to.
What justifies a belief? And
well,
yeah,
I think I've heard, well, let's say you believe it's raining, right?
yeah, I remember this example. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
So it is raining, right? And the reason you believe it's raining is you might be looking out your window and you see, water coming down from the sky, and you hear it on your rooftop, and you can just see it's raining. Like, I can't explain it that poetically. So you believe it's raining, and that belief is justified by the fact that it's raining.
Oh, okay, it's justified by the fact that it is raining.
Well, that's justified true belief. Actually, yeah, I didn't explain it properly. That's what
Okay.
a justified true belief is. The justification is the things you sort of took in that make it very likely that it's raining, right? So when you see the water coming from the sky, well, we know that that's what rain is, right? So that's sort of evidence that it's raining.
You're the one doing the determining, though, right? So
okay, I don't know why it copied of any gods. Ignore that part. The Pastebin is the Pastebin link right there.
Okay, just one sec, everybody. Just a point of moderation. Can we hear from Ozzy, who's got some knowledge on this? Ozzy, hey, welcome to Clubhouse. First time we've spoken. Perhaps you can speak on this topic if you have a few moments.
Hi, Rob. Yeah, I actually think we have spoken before, just not here on Clubhouse. And thanks for inviting me up. Yeah, I just wanted to talk for a sec about this issue of justification, what justifies a belief. So the way Haiti was expressing it, I think it's not quite correct. It's along the right track, but it makes it, the way she presented it, makes it sound as if it is merely a state of affairs that justifies a belief. So, for instance, if the state of affairs is that it is raining, and your belief is that it is raining, it isn't the state of affairs that it is raining that justifies it, because now you're equating justification with the truth condition. So you have the belief condition, I believe it's raining. You have the belief condition, then you have the truth condition, which is that it is in fact raining. But the justification condition in JTB is supposed to be some third thing. It can't just be that the veracity of the proposition is what justifies it, right? That's what the veracity condition is, what distinguishes a true belief from a false belief, but it's not what distinguishes a true belief from knowledge, right? So Haiti was right in pointing to veracity, but not as the condition that justifies a belief. So here's one model I'm going to give you that would sort of help here, I think. When you want to know what justifies a belief, ask yourself what you're doing when you're offering a justification. If someone says, Ozzy, why do you believe it's raining? And well, what would I say? Well, Haiti said it. I look outside and I see that it's raining. But it's not the fact that it's raining that justifies it. It's the fact that I can see that it's raining. In other words, my belief is the result of some causal process. In this case, a reliable belief-forming process, namely vision. And in the case of a reliable belief-forming process such as vision, we normally take that to be a sufficient justification for a belief. That is to say, if I believe it's raining, and it is raining, and my belief that it is raining is occasioned or caused by a reliable belief-forming process such as vision, then my belief is justified. All right. And as a result, for instance, my dog can see that it's raining. My dog doesn't have a conscious propositional belief in its head that it's raining, but my dog can easily discriminate when it's raining from when it's not, when his dog dish is full of food and when it's empty, right? So my dog can know things, but my dog isn't able to sort of formulate sentences and express propositions and affirm a belief in them. But my dog does have dispositional states of belief, and my dog does have dispositional states of belief that are caused by a state of affairs. So if your belief is caused by the state of affairs that the belief is about, then you can say that the belief is justified. So that would be what's called a causal theory of knowing, a causal account of justification. And you can extend that concept of justification as being the result of causation. You can extend or expand that notion of causation to include not just perceptual practices and cognitive practices like memory. Like, how do I know I went on a picnic last summer? I remember that I went on a picnic last summer. And if my memory is reliable, then I know what I think I know about having gone on that picnic. I can extend it to memory as well as direct occurrent perception. But I could also extend it to inferential practices, not just processes in the hardware in my brain, but I can extend it to include inferential practices such as induction and deduction. Those are reliable belief-forming practices as opposed to processes. And so if my belief that it's raining results from my inference that the weather network tends to get these things right, and I got it from the weather network. I didn't see that it was raining, but I know they saw it. I have reason to think that they saw it, and I have reason to believe that they are reliable purveyors of information. Then if I form the belief that it's raining on the basis of the weather network through a chain of both perception, memory, and inferences, reliable inferences, then I can be justified that way, which is how most of our knowledge is acquired. Most of our knowledge is justified not by direct perception, except for ordinary perceptual beliefs, and not exclusively by memory, and not exclusively by inferences, but by a suite of all of those things. So how do I know that that there was an American Civil War? Well, I wasn't there. I didn't witness any of it, and I don't know anyone who was. But I rely on a belief-forming process of inference based on trusted authorities who would have been in a position to know that it happened, right? So your justification can be the result of a very, very long causal chain that includes other people's memories and beliefs and their inferential practices and your inferential practices that lead you to trust in those, right? So if you think about it, most of our knowledge is not directly acquired. It's very, very indirect. It's how I know that there's a Cairo, Egypt, even though I've never been to Cairo, Egypt. And so that would be a causal theory of knowing. So that would be one account of justification that would distinguish between the truth condition and the belief condition. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I wanted to ask you, Ozzy, I appreciate that very much. So if we went back, say we go back in time and we look at people who believe the earth was flat, and at that time they felt justified in what they believed, and they would in fact probably say that if they were going by this understanding, they would say they had justified true belief based on their senses that, the earth looks or feels flat, looks flat, various other things that they would look at that you would say in general would be reliable. But obviously we would say now their perception was wrong and they weren't truly justified. So how can you ever get to the point that you can say your belief is justified?
Oh, that's a great question. Okay, so you're offering a counterexample where people have a belief, they are abiding by a reliable belief-forming process, namely they're looking around at the world and to their immediate experiences, it looks flat, and they're relying on trusted authorities, which is another reliable inferential practice that most of us employ, and they come to the conclusion that the earth is flat, but in fact, the earth is not flat. So the truth condition is violated. So it's not knowledge right away. So right away we can say, okay, well, they don't know. They don't know what they think they know. But now your question to me is, okay, sure, they don't know what they think they know, and we think we know what we think we know. What's the difference? How are we to know that we're not just like them, right? How do we know that the earth isn't a cube? right?
Right.
Maybe we're both wrong, right? Maybe
Right.
they were wrong and we're wrong too, right? How do
Right.
we know? Okay, so this is great, because what happens here is, if you think about what JTB is not a procedure for acquiring knowledge. JTB isn't an account of knowledge. You hear this, what's your account of knowledge? And then people trot out the JTB definition. It's a definition of knowledge. It's supposed to specify the conditions under which you would know. It's not supposed to provide you with a procedure or a process by which you can acquire knowledge and then know that you know. It doesn't. It's not what it's trying to do. You can have an account of knowledge, but JTB is not an account. It is merely a definition that specifies 3 conditions, and if those conditions are met, then you know what you think you know. If any one of those conditions does not obtain, then there's no knowledge there, right? So that it's just a definition, all right? So we're looking at this sort of from the outside looking in. We're not trying to figure out how we know if we are in fact genuinely justified, or if we've just offered up reasons that are not connected, not tethered to the truth condition in the right way, right? So JTB doesn't try to do that. You need an account of justification, right? Now, the causal theory that I put forward is the same kind of thing. It's a definition of justification, but it's not a process. It's sort of not advice on what to do. It's supposed to cash out what we mean by justification. So if you think about, what people mean by knowledge, for instance, the reason we come up with those 3 conditions is if you look around at the world and you look at the pattern of how people apply the word knowledge and when they don't, right? You'll notice that there are these 3 conditions that are satisfied, right? Everyone seems to be able to distinguish between believing something and not believing something, between having a true belief and a false belief, and then this weird other thing, knowing that something is true. And it's the same thing for justification. We need a definition that captures how we actually use the word, right? Now, going back to knowledge for a moment, the reason we settle on these 3 conditions is because of something called the pattern of attribution and retractions of the term knowledge. We say that, Jones knows that P is true under those 3 conditions. Okay, but why do we bother distinguishing between that and a true belief, right? Well, just look at what happens, right? We don't say of people in the ancient world who might have thought the earth was flat, or that didn't believe that it orbited the sun or something like that, or that it spun on its axis. We would not say they knew the earth was flat. We would say, no, they thought they knew the earth was flat, right? They thought they knew, but we know that they didn't, all right? Or we believe that they didn't. The idea is this: we would not go back and say they didn't believe it. There can be such a thing as a false belief, but there can't be such a thing as false knowledge. The way knowledge works in our language, in every natural language that I know of, I mean, it works in Latin and it works in French, it works in Spanish, and my knowledge of other languages is extremely limited, so I can't say that it works that way universally in all natural languages, but in most natural languages, there's a distinction in our concept of knowledge from true belief. Right? We recognize that there's an important a distinction between knowledge and true belief as there is between true belief and false belief. But in the case of belief, if a person has a false belief, we don't say they didn't believe it. But when we find out that a person's justification was wrong or the truth condition was violated, we say, nope, they didn't know it at all. They merely believed it. The pattern of attribution and retraction of the predicate knowledge is different than the pattern of attribution and retraction for belief. All right. So this is why we have this concept of knowledge that's distinct from true belief, and why it never works to just try to reduce the concept of knowledge to true belief. So now, this is a similar thing that goes on with justification. We say that a person is justified, and then if we find out that the justification is wonky, that the person was relying on a bad process, right? If the process was in fact not reliable, if they were trusting in the testimony of someone who is an inveterate liar, or if they were trusting on some inference rule of logic, but they were misapplying the inference rule, we would say, oh, no, sorry, modus ponens is a good procedure, but you weren't applying modus ponens, you were doing something else. You were committing a fallacy like, affirming the consequent or something like that. Okay? Then we would deny that they were justified. We would not say, yeah, they were justified and then they weren't. We would say they were never justified. We would retract the justification predicate from them. We would say they thought they were justified. They weren't, in fact, justified. All of this is to say that in the case of these terms like knowledge and justification, we are giving definitions that capture the meaning of these predicates, so that we can make explicit the distinctions that we all implicitly apply in natural language. That's what we're doing with these definitions. Now, what you're asking about is how the hell would I know, though? What I really want to know is I want to know that I know. Now, this is the interesting thing, and philosophers, epistemologists are divided on this. Although I think most of them would agree with what I'm about to say here, or where I'm going to put down my chips here. But the idea that in order to know something, you must know that you know it is a dubious idea. Some philosophers think, yeah, you have to know what you know in order to know it. I can't know that P unless I know that I know P. Most epistemologists would say, no, you don't have to know that you know. You can just know things. My dog knows that when there's food in his dish, but my dog doesn't know that he knows. He can't even represent this proposition to himself. He can't give reasons, right? My dog has reliable belief-forming processes that allow my dog to know things, but my dog doesn't know that he knows, right? My dog doesn't even know that he has beliefs. We have language. We have the ability to reflect on our beliefs, reflect on that causal process. If you think about what the act of justifying is in language, if a person says, well, how do you justify that? What do I do? Well, I say, well, I saw it, or I remember it, or I applied this such and such an inference rule, or I applied a scientific inductive procedure or something like that. What you're doing when you give these reasons, what you're doing is you are reconstructing the causal pathway. You are trying to reconstruct in words, in propositions, a description of how your belief is the causal result of a state of affairs about which you have a belief. That's what you're trying to do. That's what it is to give a justification. But that's not what it is to have a justification. That's what it is to give a justification. Now, some people are what we call internalists with respect to justification. They think to justify isn't just the having of a justification, it's the ability, the capacity to give the justification to someone, to explain it, to express it, to articulate it, either to others or to oneself. And absent that capacity to express the justification, then you don't have a justification. In other words, the capacity to give the justification is part of the justification. And if you can't do that, as Aaron Ra would say, naively, I think, if you can't show it, you don't know it, right? He thinks you have to be able to show that you know something in order to know it. I would say no. That means that babies don't know anything. Animals don't know anything. In fact, most of the time, most people wouldn't know things that they evidently do know, because most people wouldn't be able to articulate and reconstruct the causal pathway from their belief back to the cause, the state of affairs that caused their belief. And so most people wouldn't know what they think they know if you imagine that justification consists of being able either consciously or at least potentially to be able to give the reasons. In the case of something like vision, if I hold up my hand in front of me and I say, oh, look, here's a human hand, it's my hand, I can't give you an account of how I know other than I can see it. That's my justification. I can see it. But someone could say, well, how do you know you can trust your vision? Well, now I'm going to have a whole theory of vision, right? Of a neurological account of vision. I'm going to have a whole theory of optics and how light works. I don't know any of that stuff, right? I don't have any of that. But does it follow that because I can't keep giving justification after justification after justification, that I don't know what I think I know? Who came up with the idea that in order to know that P, you must know that you know that P?
Can I ask?
That, I think, is a slippery idea. Yeah, I'm just going to finish up
Oh, sorry.
in 10 seconds here. That's okay. So thank you for indulging me this long. So the idea that you have to know that you know is called the KK principle, the know that you know principle. And it's a highly suspicious principle. And I think the reason people sort of naively and intuitively think that you have to be able to know that you know is because for the purposes of persuasion and discourse and for the purposes of critical evaluation of your own knowledge and whether you have knowledge, it's important that you be able to articulate that. But it is, I would submit, not necessary for you to know that you know in order for you to know things. I think we all know things most of the time without knowing that we know. It's not a requirement on knowledge. But for the purposes of persuading other people, for the purposes of critical evaluation and regulating how much confidence you ought to have in a belief, it is important that you be able to represent and reconstruct the justification to yourself and to others. But that serves pragmatic functions. It's not constitutive of knowledge, of the having of knowledge itself. I think you can have knowledge without the KK principle. And so what I've given here now is what's called an externalist account. You just have to have a justification. You just have to be in a certain relationship to the facts. Your beliefs have to be occasioned in the right way, and then you know what you think you know, irrespective of whether you understand that causal process and whether or not you can express it to other people.
That was awesome, Ozzy. And I know Godless wants to ask you a question. I just want to quickly say, hopefully you'll stick around because I do have. I mean, there's a lot there, but there's just one follow up I do want to ask you about, and I very much appreciate what you said. But yeah, go ahead, Godless.
So if it's true, like say that your hands are there, like true being there, meaning that like it's an external object that has mass and it's not an illusion, it necessarily follows that some Cartesian scenario is not the case, right? So if you know your hands are there, it necessarily follows that you would have to know that a Cartesian scenario is not the case, because otherwise it's like saying I know the object in front of me is a square, but I do not know that it has angles.
Right. Okay. So I don't think that's quite right. It wouldn't follow. Okay. So let me re-express this to make sure I'm getting this. So if I know that there's a human hand in front of me when I hold my hand in front of my face, right, then that would, by implication, imply that certain Cartesian skeptical considerations, like I'm being deceived by an evil genius or I'm dreaming or something like that, that would preclude those scenarios being true, right?
What's
Because they can't
preclude
both.
mean?
What's that?
I don't know what preclude means.
It would make it impossible. I could ignore it. I could exclude that from consideration. Right. I would be free to exclude the possibility that I'm dreaming or that I'm in the grips of an evil demon or I'm a brain in a vat. If it is in fact, if I actually believe that it's true that this is a human hand in front of me, that would be inconsistent with me dreaming it. Right. It can't be the case that I know that there's a hand in front of me and that I'm just dreaming it. Because if I'm dreaming it, then I don't know that there's a hand in front of me, right? So it would exclude or preclude that possibility, right? But it wouldn't preclude me knowing it because I would have to believe that, okay? So in other words, it would be possible for me to know that this is a human hand in front of me, know nothing about Descartes and his evil demon argument, and therefore I don't believe in that argument. I don't believe in its potency, and therefore I wouldn't know that that possibility is um, uh, uh, incompatible with my view that there's a human hand. So you're right that if I know what I think I know, then certain skeptical considerations have to be ignored, right? But I don't necessarily know those things, right? I would be rationally committed to those things. That is to say, I ought to believe that those other things that are implied by my claim that here is a human hand. But I wouldn't necessarily believe those. I might not believe those, and I certainly wouldn't have to know them if I don't even get as far as believing them. So I could believe them and not know them, or I could neither believe them nor know them. But what you're right about in your question, what I think motivates your question is, if I know that this is a human hand in front of me, then I ought not to be perplexed or puzzled uh, uh, or confounded by these skeptical considerations of radical skepticism. And in fact, I think that's how we proceed. I think it actually is an argument that cuts in favor of the view that I'm advancing. That is, if you look at this, if you look at how people actually proceed, they do not, from day to day, moment to moment, worry about the problems of radical skepticism, that they're dreaming, that they're a brain in a vat, that they're in the grips of an evil demon feeding them thoughts or systematically deceiving them, and stuff like that. We are not so perturbed, right? Because I think we are all, in fact, committed implicitly to a causal theory of knowledge. And that's one of the reasons I favor the causal theory of knowledge.
But
It's
so are
also
you
why.
saying that is there a disanalogy with the square and the angles?
No, there's no disanalogy, because in the case of the square, a person can know that something is a square and not realize that a square is a four-sided object with 90-degree corners, with four 90-degree corners. A person can know and believe one thing without knowing and believing the other. I mean, that's just kind of like, this is a case of
Oh, I see. So you're saying like
referential opacity.
if there's people who haven't been presented with the thought experiment of a Cartesian scenario, then they don't have to know it.
Yeah, they would know it, or they could be presented by it and then just find it unpersuasive, and so they're not. They could fail to reach the right conclusion, the right implication. So in other words, what you're saying is, wouldn't it be the case that the right conclusion for them would be to realize, hey, if I'm right that I know these things, then I can ignore these skeptical issues. And I think that's absolutely right. And in fact, that's exactly what people do. That's exactly what people do.
Where you do know that a square necessarily has angles, then isn't it the case that if you know the shape in front of you is a square, that you know it has four angles?
You should, in exactly the same way that if you know that thing up in the sky that you call the evening star is Venus, if you know that there's an identity between Venus and the evening star, then you should know that when you're looking at the evening star, that you're looking at Venus, and vice versa. But a person might not necessarily make that connection.
Yeah, I understand that. Right? So, like in your case, though, you have pondered the Cartesian scenarios. So when you say that you know you have hands in front of you, doesn't that necessarily follow that you know you're not in a Cartesian scenario?
That's right. If I know what I think I know.
So how do you know you're not in a Cartesian scenario?
I don't. I don't know that
you don't know that you have hands.
No, I don't know that what I think I know. I don't have to know what I think I know. I may know. It's possible I know what I think I know, right? So when I put up my hands in front of me, right, I go, oh, here's a hand in front of me, and I think I know that. Now, if I know that, then I know that Cartesianism is false. The Cartesian skeptical consideration is false. I can rule it out, right? But if you ask me, but Ozzy, how do you know that your reliable belief-forming processes, such as vision, are not failing you, or how do you know that you're not dreaming? I don't know those things. I don't know those things. In other words, I don't know that I know, but I don't think that's a condition on knowledge. I don't think it's important that you know that you know. What's important is that you be able to give justifications for the purposes of rational persuasion. It's a pragmatic consideration. I need to be able to give reasons so that I can evaluate my own level of confidence. In the present case, in the scenario you're giving, I realize I have no guarantee that I'm not dreaming this entire conversation right now, and that I'm in fact some kind of different kind of organism floating in space, and I don't even have hands. I just dreamt up the whole thing. It's possible that I am radically wrong about everything. Okay, potentially, right?
So why don't
understanding that is a possibility means that I wouldn't know any of the things that I think I know, if that's true. But I don't, in fact, believe that. And so I'm unperturbed by that. Nobody is perturbed by this. I mean, even in your dreams, you don't worry that you're dreaming. In your dreams, I mean, that's what's so horrible about nightmares is you take them as veridical. You think they're real. You think they're actual. And this is just how we proceed. So I'm not worried by the fact that I can't establish that I know that I know. Nobody can do that. And I don't think that should be a condition on knowledge. That's not what the word knowledge does in our language. That's not what the word justification functions as in our language. It is not supposed to be self-guaranteeing and precluding every other alternative possibility. That's not why we make the distinction between true and false. It's not why we make the distinction between true belief and knowledge. And it's not why we make the distinction between an unwarranted or unjustified belief and a justified belief, right? These concepts exist in our language to serve certain functions. right? We are recognizing legitimate distinctions about our epistemic circumstances in the world, but they are not supposed to be self-guaranteeing, and they aren't self-guaranteeing, which is why these skeptical considerations continue to exist. They are live possibilities, but we're untroubled by them.
Well, why don't we just expand belief, right? The belief category, and keep the knowledge category very, very small. I mean, why? It seems like we're overinflating the knowledge category, because it seems like we're never going to be able to tell that when someone says, I know this, how they know it if they're not even
Right.
sure what that causal chain is.
Yeah.
So it seems like it's less practical
That's
to
what I was
say,
going to
let's
say.
just make,
Yeah, Robert,
yeah.
I'm totally with you, Robert, and that piggybacks exactly what I wanted to ask you, Ozzy. I really appreciate this very much. So what is the benefit of even using, I still don't understand the benefit of using the word no. Why couldn't
Okay,
we say,
sure.
why couldn't
Yeah.
we say I believe in degrees of confidence and
Mhm.
say percentage wise, like a Bayesian type thing, and just say, hey, I apart from certainty, there's a degree of belief, and I can strongly believe something. What is the value of adding the word no, or even having that concept? It just seems to muddy the water to me. I don't like to use that word except colloquially. So I don't understand it.
Okay. The colloquial usage of knowing things, right? That's the right usage, right? The all that the sort of something like the JTB account of knowledge does for you is capture a distinction you apply all the time. Every single day, you make the distinction between things that you believe and things that you think are true, not just believed to be true, but believed to be true, and you think you have arrived at the beliefs in some way, so that you should believe them, right? Like, I'll give you an example of a belief I have that I don't think I should have. I believe that there is uh, life out there in the cosmos. Now, there's really not good reason for thinking that. There's not, good reason for ruling it out. And people will be divided on this. Some of you might think, of course, there's good reason, Ozzy. The universe is so big, and there's so many solar systems out there, and there's a good chance that there's life out there, maybe even intelligent life. That's my hunch too. But really, there's not much evidence that should sway me. I shouldn't feel as strongly as I do about it. Okay. I would not say that I know that. I would say that I believe it. So here's a case of something that I take to be true, but that I would never purport to know. Why? Because I know that my justification is kind of weak, it's kind of lame, right? It's based as much on hunch and sort of a wish for it to be true as anything else, right? So I believe it to be true. I actually quite strongly believe it to be true. But I know I can't back this up. I know that this belief is just not the causal result of the state of affairs. I can't even come close to reconstructing the causal pathway by which I arrived at this belief and believe it with such as much conviction as I do. So right away, I know I shouldn't say that I know.
Well,
I must never say that I know this to be true, but I do believe it. So there is a distinction that we make every day. Contrast that with, I know that I'm holding a phone right now while I'm having this conversation. Oh, hang on, wait a minute. I'm I really think that I can trust in my vision and all of my senses right now. And I know that there's a procedure by which I could have this independently corroborated by someone else. I could, knock on my neighbor's door and say, "Excuse me, is this a phone I'm holding in my hand?" I could get some independent corroboration, and I have reason to think that such independent corroboration is itself another reliable process, and so forth. So the whole point of using knowledge, the term knowledge, is that it marks a distinction, a relevant distinction that every one of us makes. Every one of us makes the distinction between when we have beliefs that are justified and hence properly tethered to the truth as we see it, and when we have beliefs that are not properly tethered. And we certainly make that distinction in the case of other people when we hear them saying something and we don't know what their justification is, and we just hear them saying something and we go, how the hell does he know that? Why is he speaking with such assuredness on that, right? So I think that the idea of getting rid of the concept would do violence to how we actually think, right? I mean, philosophy here has to sort of be in service of the distinctions we actually apply. It's no good to try to come up with a definition of knowledge that legislates how we should think and talk about knowledge that flies in the face of natural language usage. I think the court of appeal on what the right concept of knowledge is ordinary language use, because that's the concept we're trying to understand. That's also why I subscribe to the correspondence theory of truth, even though that's kind of considered old-fashioned and a little bit out of favor. But I think the correspondence theory of truth, for all of its problems, is what people mean by truth. And I don't want an account of truth that flies in the face of how we actually talk about truth and falsity, and how we use words like true and false and real and not real and so forth. If you have a concept of truth, a philosophical notion of truth that is divorced from natural language use, then it has no applicability in ordinary life. And then I have no need of that philosophy. That really is the sort of the mental masturbation that people sort of worry about philosophers getting down to. And so I don't worry about that. So in other words, I think that the concept of knowledge is an analytical distinction that we all implicitly believe in and recognize, but we're not in a position to know when we are satisfying the knowledge condition, right?
Yeah.
We don't know that we know, right? Maybe we know things, and there are times when we know things, but we're almost never in a position to know that we know. And even in cases where you can give a justification for your justification, you don't necessarily know that that justification is right. And so you can know that you know, perhaps, but will you know that you know that you know? And if you do that,
Right.
will you know that you know that you know, and so forth? And you get into the regress. But I don't think the regress problem is something we ever have to worry about. And that's why nobody actually worries about it. It is purely worrying about the regress problem is a recognition of the fact that we make an analytical distinction, but are not in a position to tell in which condition we find ourselves in. Are we in a knowledge condition, or merely a true belief condition, or a false belief condition? Right? We can't always tell. In fact, much of the time we can't tell, and possibly we can never tell. Right? I mean, some people think that this can never actually be justified.
But that's sort of what, oh, sorry, my window's down. But that's sort of what you just did, though. I mean, you made the distinction between their life being out in the universe, and there's some sort of justification for that. But then when you talked about you having your phone in your hand, you went through an extensive causal chain of why you believe and how you could demonstrate and how you could say with more confidence that you know what you know. So wouldn't it just be a matter of saying that, more of that causal chain would lead you closer to something called knowledge, and less of that causal chain would be closer to something called belief?
Yes, that's in fact what we do. The more you can, the more detailed and explicit you can be in the reconstruction of that causal chain from the state of affairs to the belief in that state of affairs, the more confident we feel, the more secure we are in our knowledge claims. Right? I mean, that's what we like about science, right?
So then we do put some weight under understanding and being able to express that causal chain. I mean, wouldn't that be a good reason? Yeah. So I feel like being able, so like again, based on the whole Aaron Roth thing, being able to express your causal chain gives rise to you actually being knowledgeable of the event or the idea or the concept, rather than not being able to connect that causal chain means that you just merely believe it.
Right. No, that's exactly right. The role of justification is it allows you to express the causal story. That helps persuade other people. Okay, they go, oh, Ozzy, has good reason for thinking he has a phone, or Ozzy has a good reason for thinking that Cairo exists, or something like that, right? Whatever the proposition is, right? But it also helps me, Ozzy, calibrate my own confidence. I can scale my confidence up and down, right? So that it's commensurate with the causal story. So that's why I gave the example of my belief that there is life out there in the universe, and extraterrestrial life. I know I don't have a good justification. I know that I believe it. I know that I have a certain degree of confidence in it. But I also know that there's a bit of a disconnect here between my justification and my confidence, and so I need to scale back my confidence. When I was younger, I used to speak with greater enthusiasm and conviction on that subject. And that's the value of the concept of justification, is it isn't just a way of persuading other people that you are a reliable person, purveyor of information, and that they should adopt your beliefs just on your say so. It's not just for that pragmatic purpose. It's also for the pragmatic purpose of of making sure, of sifting through your beliefs and making sure that you don't have a pile of false beliefs because they've never been properly examined, and to get your own confidence to scale up and down so that it's commensurate with the causal the degree of sophistication in your causal story. So in the case of vision, it helps that we have a theory of vision. I don't know much about vision, but there are people, neurophysiologists who understand the visual cortex and how everything goes from the retina through the optic nerve into the visual cortex. And they could tell you a complicated story about how vision works and under what conditions you can be systematically fooled by illusions, visual illusions, and stuff like that. There are physicists who can tell you, enormously complicated stories about light and optics and stuff like that. And having those stories in place gives us a greater sense of confidence in our trust in the reliability of our senses. Not only does it tell us that our senses are reliable, it tells us the conditions under which our senses are unreliable and when they can be fooled and when you should not be trusting in your senses. Right? We all sort of have some intuitive understanding that, in dim light conditions, I might not be able to trust my vision when I'm trying to recognize someone at a distance, at dusk or something like that. I might know that there are better viewing conditions, so I'll have an intuitive understanding of that. But having a good theory of optics and a good theory of visual perception will allow us to better understand the scope and limits of that reliability that we place in our visual apparatus, right? So, justification is vital. It's important. It is a reason why you insist on people justifying their beliefs, right? But what I'm arguing for here is don't think that it's important that you know, right? There's a distinction to be made between knowledge and true belief. That's an important distinction that we all implicitly make in ourselves and other people. All right. But it is not a condition on knowledge that you know that you know. That is, I think, the mistake that people make. They think that in order to know, you must know that you know. You have to satisfy the KK principle. But what the hell is the argument for the KK principle? Right? It's just expressing a wish that there would be some procedure by which we would know that we know, so we wouldn't ever mistake a false belief for knowledge. Right?
Yeah, it's interesting.
It's a desideratum, but how is that a necessity on the concept of knowledge? I don't think that the distinction is jeopardized because we can't tell if we know what we think we know.
The presuppositionist is always demanding this account for things like intelligibility. So this would be a great response just to say, I reject the KK principle, right? Because they're asking you to give some fundamental justification that you know anything.
Right. Yeah. Ask them for the justification for the KK principle.
Nice.
And they'll say, well, you won't be able to tell. And my answer is, yeah, you won't be able to tell. And neither can you. So shut up about it. You're imposing a condition. You're requiring a condition on knowledge and specifically applying it to me and insisting that you don't have to satisfy that condition. But it gets worse than that. The presuppositionalists pull a trick. They do a bait and switch. They say of you, you must abide by the internalist condition of being able to give reasons endlessly. You must have conscious, occurrent reasons that are available to you now and that you can give to me now for how you know and how you know that you know and how you know that justification is right and how you know that justification is right ad infinitum. You need to be able to satisfy that internalist condition. And you go, oh, really? Shit, that sucks. And so you try to trot out a story, and then you keep trotting out a story, and eventually you hit bottom in your justification, and you run out of justification. They go, aha, see, the whole edifice falls apart. And then you ask them, how do you do it? And they say, oh, God just, zaps knowledge into my head. Well, how do you know that? Or they'll say, God is the justification. Well, how do you know that? You can always ask them, how do you know that? How do you know that? You can do the same thing with them. But what they insist on is this. They insist on the externalist condition. They say, look, I don't have to necessarily know. It just has to be the case that there's a God, and then that will secure knowledge. Well, I take the same externalist view. I'm an externalist also. I don't have to know that my theory of vision is right. There just has to be a theory of vision that's reliable for me to trust in and know things on the basis of vision. I don't have to know how memory works, what's going on in my brain. We know scarcely anything about how memory works. We don't even know how memories are stored in the brain, right? We don't even know that, but everyone trusts in their memories, right? There just has to be a causal story, okay, that is true. I don't have to know what that causal story is. In fact, nobody does know that causal story.
Not trying to interrupt. There's actually a lot of data on that now. They're starting to figure it out. They're still early on, but
okay, well maybe it's early days, but
stored and kind of how, but it's still up in the air.
What's the response when they claim that their justification is somehow superior because it would have to be some kind of external, I don't know, truth maker or something, and the atheist isn't usually claiming that? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Well, I mean, I think atheists are wrong not to posit an external truth maker, but an external truth maker, it doesn't have to be a god or a sentient being. Like, well, I mean, maybe I'm reading too much into the expression truth maker here, but
not even. They're just saying like our thing is objective. If it were true, it would be objective. Therefore, we're more justified than you are because, whatever you believe is completely subjective. I think it's something like that. They just want to say we're in the better spot than you.
Well, it seems to me we're in the same epistemic boat. I posit a mind-independent reality, and I have a brain with reliable belief-forming processes, and I can undertake reliable belief-forming practices. And that's how I'm able to arrive at beliefs that amount to knowledge. Okay. And you're able to do that too. We're all able to do that, right? So I posit something outside of my mind, namely the world, and my brain generates beliefs, right? It's a causal theory of belief generation. It's a causal theory of knowledge. I have something external too. But they'll say, yeah, but how do you know that? Well, I can play that how do you know that game with you and your made up God, who, by the way, as an account of knowledge and justification, this God that serves as the guarantor of your beliefs, right? That's a completely vacuous account because they can't specify what the features are of God that allow that to take place.
Right.
Everything that's said about their God is, in my view, completely invented. It's stipulated. None of this is known. None of this is discovered. They merely say God just has whatever attributes would be necessary, and we can't specify what they are, to create universes, to create minds, to create beings with free will, and so forth, right? God has, whatever unspecified properties would be necessary to create the very things that we find.
Yeah.
That's your account. Yeah. I'd say you're easily satisfied by this theory that seems to me completely explanatorily vacuous. So that would be my response.
Let me ask you, Ozzy. So if God appeared to me and made it to where I did know, in the sense that I'm justified because he's appearing before me and various other things, right? Like if he's omnipotent, then and can do things that are logically possible, he could make me know, in the sense that compel me strongly enough that I am fully justified in believing that he exists. So couldn't I know that? Wouldn't that not be made up?
Yes, you could. Okay. So supposing God existed and presented himself to you, just in like some Zeus-like fashion, he just appears in front of you and demonstrates, like Bruce Almighty, his godlike omnipotence, right? Then I concluded, wow, this is God. Here before me stands a God. Yes, I would believe that there was a God. Presumably that would be true, and I would be justified. I would have all the justification I need, right? The problem with the idea that God can just make you know is that if God can just cause you to know something to be true, he can cause you to believe something just as easily to be false, right?
Sure.
A God that has this power over your mind to make you feel something with absolute conviction,
right?
But it not be the result of a reliable process is a God that can make you believe things that are falsehoods.
Sure.
Right. So that's the problem with sort of God just beaming knowledge into your head. But if God really did generate a belief in me that was a result of my reliable belief forming processes and practices, right? So supposing there was a valid and sound proof of God, right? A formal proof of God.
Right.
Okay, that's a reliable belief forming practice. If I could conclude that God exists on the basis of the Kalam or a prime mover argument or something like that, then I would know what I think I know. I would come to the belief, if I was convinced by that argument, I would believe that there was a God, and presumably that would be the result of the fact that there is a God, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
that would be fine. Yeah,
Yeah.
that would be, yeah. It's entirely
Right.
possible. It's logically possible that a God could cause me to know things.
Yeah. Well, I thought you were saying. So I thought you were saying at first that we couldn't know. So.
Oh no! What I was saying is the presuppositionalists trying to suggest that their externalist story of justification and knowledge was somehow superior to the one that I offered. My point is that their account is just empty and vacuous. That's the problem I have with presuppositionalism, is they insist that you abide by the strictures of internalism and endlessly give justifications. But when you ask them, they go, oh, no. There's just this external being that serves as the guarantor of my beliefs. And my view is, no, I actually know things not on because I can give endless justifications. Nobody can satisfy that condition and the KK principle. I know things because I have an externalist story too, right? That there is a world, there's a mind-independent reality, that our brains are evolved organs, and so we have these reliable belief-forming processes that allow us to arrive at true beliefs, and that's my account. I have an externalist justification too.
Also, isn't there a question for Ozzy? If in the scenario where the god appears before you in Zeus-like fashion, starts doing some pulling off some tricks, declaring itself to be God and everything, that provides you with a justified true belief. You can take this into account, like, well, this thing, he appeared before me, I saw him with my eyes. So the belief in him is justified, but it can still be the case that that's not a god, right?
Yes, exactly. So supposing that I form the belief that there's here stands a God before me because he demonstrates his extraordinary powers, right? But someone could come along and say, yeah, but Ozzy, how do you know that you're not just being deceived or tricked? How do you know this is, maybe you're not dreaming, but maybe there's some alien that's with some super advanced technology that's able to work what appear to us to be miracles, and you're mistaking.
Right. There's just a better God out there. There's
right,
one
yeah,
better than this one, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, this is a petty Zeus-like God, right? But there's an even greater God. Yep, that's all possible, right? But the point is this: if my belief that here is a God, or here is the ultimate God, if that is the result of a reliable belief-forming process that traces itself back causally to the fact that there really is such a being in front of me, okay, then I know what I think I know, right? I wouldn't know that I know, but I would in fact know that there's a God.
So,
right?
So Ozzy, you take a externalist justification, right? An externalist conception of knowledge. Is that right?
Yes, I do.
And it's based on like a bunch of things that you've already stated. That there is an external world, that you do have reliable belief-forming processes, those things.
Yes.
Are those beliefs themselves justified?
Well, they would be justified externally, but there wouldn't be justified independently. So my view is that everyone's rational architecture is based on assumptions that cannot themselves be rationally justified. So I think everyone starts with faith commitments. So I believe in a mind-independent reality. I believe that there exist other minds. I believe in causation. I believe in the distinction between truth and falsity. I believe in the general reliability of my senses. I believe in the general reliability of memory. I believe in induction. I believe in deduction, and so forth. These are the beliefs. I take these beliefs to all be properly basic. I believe that they are universal. I believe everyone has them. I believe no one had to learn them. No one was ever taught these things.
That's not what I'm asking. Are those
beliefs No. I know. No, are what?
Are those beliefs justified?
No, that's what I'm saying. They are all blind faith commitments. Everyone starts with blind faith. Everyone. At the bottom of everyone's rational epistemic architecture Everything is an edifice based on blind faith commitments, right?
Right.
My dog practices induction. He doesn't have reasons to practice induction. He just does induction. We just do induction as animals.
Okay, so like what you're saying is you build like a superstructure of your system based on these foundations.
Right. Exactly.
Okay. Is there any fact of the matter as to what these foundations should be?
No, there isn't. There isn't.
I don't mean to cut you off. I'll be quiet and listen to the answer.
No, that's fine.
Why did you call them properly basic then?
Okay, they're properly basic because, again, this is about what we mean by terms. So just as I gave an account, the JTB account and my account of justification in terms of, this is just what we mean when we say justification. This is just what we mean when we use the term knowledge. This is just what we mean when we talk about belief, right? This is just what we mean by truth and falsity, which is why I'm a correspondence theorist, right? Similarly, this is just what we mean by reasoning. There's a number of conditions that I think have to be satisfied for something to be properly basic. One is it has to be universally held. Another is that it can't be taught to you. It's just sort of innate. You don't have to teach people to believe in causation or to trust their senses or their memory, and stuff like that, right? This is just innate. It's universal. But these are also interesting in that there's no way to justify them. None of these things can be justified except on pain of circularity. Every one of them, if you try to justify them, is like try to justify the reliability of your memory. What the hell are you going to use? You're going to have to exercise your memory in the justification for it. How are you going to? No. So hang on. So the point is this: these are all ingredients in rationality they are pre-rational. These are pre-rational faith commitments that we have to have, and the reason these are properly basic is that if you violate these, if you deny any of them and actually try to live that way, you will not only seem irrational, you might even seem mad. Go a day without exhibiting an implicit commitment to the ones that I listed, and there's a lot more that I could list, right? So that's what makes them properly basic. This is just what we mean when we talk about rationality. It's trusting in your senses. It's relying in your senses. It's using your senses as much as you can. It's trusting in your memory, not just ignoring your memory. It's applying induction. Yeah, go ahead.
So earlier you said there is no fact of the matter as to what your foundation should be. Is that right?
Well, no. The only thing that could mean should be is that you use these. There's no fact of the matter as to what you should use. It's just a fact of the matter of this is what we as organisms use. Reason has to be relativized to the kinds of critters that we are.
All right. So maybe somebody has a different set of axioms, and maybe because of that, bad things happen to them. Wouldn't it be the fallacy of consequence to say, well, because bad things happen to him, therefore his set is like false?
Yes, it would be. It would be. Yeah. There's no principled reason why these are the assumptions we make.
Right. But listen, here's the question that makes me think of. If you have this set of axioms, and if they're pre-rational, on what basis do you have them then? Are they like dispositional? Are they like
they're entirely dispositional. Yeah. They're entirely dispositional. We are naturally wired to trust our senses, to trust our memory, to apply induction, to apply primitive first order logic, to assume that we live in a world with other minds, that there's a mind-independent reality, that there is causation, that there is a distinction to be made between truth and falsity. We are just what we do, just like breathing.
Right. Wouldn't it follow if your axioms are dispositional, that every deduction that you can draw from those axioms would just be dispositional in the final analysis?
It is. All rationality, all reasoning is intuitive. How do I know that?
It's worse than that. I think it's worse than that. I think you might be saying that like reasoning is just like your feels, you know?
It's just like what? Sorry.
It's just like your feeling.
Well, it is. It is. It is your feels. It actually is. It just happens to be a feel. It doesn't just happen. I mean, for evolutionary reasons, I think these are the feels that are truth conducive. These are the feels that generate true beliefs, and why we have those feels. We have the feeling that if A is equal to B and B is equal to C, therefore A is equal to C. I don't have an explanation for that. No one ever had to teach me that. I mean, I was taught to think of it formally as A is identical to B, B is identical to C, therefore A is identical to C. But I was doing that before anyone taught me it. In fact, I could only be taught that because I recognized its veracity when it was expressed to me. It's the same for logic. It's the same for math. It's the same for geometry.
I think the leg up that the presuppositionalist has, or just like the Christian, I should say, has, is they will actually offer a grounding to some of those, like those axiomatic beliefs, you know, that you have, like those foundations. They'll offer some ground,
excellent point.
Right? And they'll say there is a fact of the matter as to what, like, quote unquote, foundational beliefs you have. And then they say, okay, well, that's God, right? They would say, that's God. And then you'd say, well, what's the justification for belief in God? And then you'd just say, well, he's necessary to account for all of this.
Well, the presuppositionalist...
That's the dissymmetry, I think, between, like, you and me, I think.
There's a great point there. The nice thing about the presuppositionalist argument is they can say, listen, I can account for why all of these rational faculties that are based on pre-rational faith commitments exist in us. And here's the story. Here's the account. And this, I think, is an account that they can give that is not vacuous. Okay? And it's this. God created the world. He created the world with us in mind. He created us for the world and the world for us. And so, of course, there's a fit between us and the world. Of course, our senses are reliable. Of course, we can trust our memories. He created a rational world. He created an ordered world that is mathematical. And so he gave us minds that are able to apprehend these truths and these patterns and these regularities and give us the intuitions that allow us to apply and recognize the truths of mathematics and set theory and geometry and logic and so forth, right? That's not a vacuous or empty account, right? It's not particularly detailed, but at least this is a story that explains why our minds are able to apprehend truths, why we have minds that are truth-seeking, and why some of our cognitive architecture, at least, not all of it, is conducive to true beliefs, right? So there, I think they have that. Our alternative as secularists would be to say, well, actually, natural selection takes care of that for us, right? But that's a more complicated story, and I think it's a better story. But they're both stories, and the simplicity of the presuppositionalist account or the creation account. You don't have to be a precept to believe this, to believe that the world was made for us and we for the world. That, I think, is a very simple story that on its face is reasonable. Listen, I hate to blather and run, but I gotta run. But I can listen for a few minutes, okay? But I got someone at my door here.
That's fine.
Right.
I think I was tracking with what you were saying. I would just say that what you've offered then is, from what I'm hearing, is your account of secularism would ultimately just be like some kind of like pragmatism at bottom. And then the Christian account would just be something different. They would say that, well, we come to knowledge not by pragmatic concerns, but by like actual inference.
No way.